Well, last Sunday night was the Oscars. I don't really care much for them myself anymore. I don't know, maybe you like them, but I don't know. Over time, I lost interest. I'm one of the millions who don't care and don't watch anymore, right? I'm in that crowd because to me it felt weird because it sort of felt like this, probably the most narcissistic night of the most self-indulgent industry on the face of the earth. Someone gets up there who's played a debaucherous character and in their acceptance speech wants to preach at America about what's wrong with the rest of us. And I gave up. I'm like, Now, you guys might like it. That's okay for you. It's just me. But I try to stay away from it because I just don't care. But I noticed on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, my not caring wasn't enough. Because I like to get on the news, and I'm going through my news feed to see, well, what's going on? Is Aaron Rodgers going to the Jets or not? I'm checking this out, right? I'm looking at what's going on in Ukraine. I want to see my news thread. And guess what's in my entire news thread? Oscars, right? Oscar stuff. I'm like, I don't care, I don't screw and run. And I'm going along, and I stumble across this one, and they're showing red carpet. Who is on the red carpet? And they got this picture of this one actress whose name I didn't even know, and she's got a white gown from the waist down, and the waist up is nothing but a shoelace and a single feather. And they're saying, the headline, the most talked about dress on the red carpet. Or the most popular dress on the red carpet. Nobody's taking pictures of that dress, pal, right? Let's not mistake the dress for her body. Let's not do that, right? And I'm sitting there looking at these pictures. I'm trying to scroll by it, and all I could think of was, how does that fit with Me Too? Well, did you guys? I'm trying to reconcile in my tiny little brain. Didn't this entire industry just spend the last 3 years talking about being over-sexualized as women and treated like sex objects? And now you're celebrating that as the most talked about dress? I could not do it. My tiny brain could not reconcile those two things. Maybe you could, but I could not. And I began to look at this and think about things, and I'm not kidding. I'm scrolling on, and I'm trying to find what in the heck is going on in Ukraine now. I'm trying to figure out the war in Ukraine, right? Scrolling through, and this one article popped up as I'm scrolling through my news feed, and it's not generic. I got The Guardian and Washington Post and LA Times and some different things in there. I tried to use a bunch of different types of things. I'm scrolling through, and there's this article about this new ad that came out where some lady is burning or shredding all the old beer commercials that used girls in bikinis. And it was celebrating changing that whole paradigm of not using girls in bikinis to sell beer. And the very next thing in my news thread was a picture of the Kardashians in bikinis. Like, I care about the Kardashians, right? And I'm trying to reconcile in my tiny pea brain, what kind of culture are we? Right? What is our moral compass? In fact, I think we have a moral compass. It just doesn't have a magnetic north. Right? I think we got, you pull out your moral compass trying to figure out what is the right thing? Who are we? What's our right? And the problem is the needle's just all over, just spinning in whatever direction you turn. There's no true north for our moral compass as a civilization anymore. We are a mighty civilization and a stupid culture. I think that's a good summation of America right now, trying to figure ourselves out. And I'm looking at this trying to figure out, well, how does this work out? We have aggressively shredded and broken the American family. We have aggressively celebrated adultery and divorce and promiscuous sex. We have aggressively celebrated that and entertained ourselves on it, right? We've said it's illegal for anyone under 18 to have sex with someone over 18, and yet we'll give out condoms in our schools, and all of the teen TV shows are about having sex with each other. What is our moral compass here? What is it we really believe? And I don't know that we believe actually anything. I think we just believe whatever is in the moment. Maybe I'm the only one. Maybe you have reconciled it. Maybe a girl with a single feather across her top as the dress in the Me Too movement did not seem to cause conflict in your brain. It didn't, maybe you reconciled that. For me, I couldn't do it. And I began to look back, and I'm kind of looking at different things, and we're studying through the Gospel of Matthew, which I have postponed a lot in my life, partly because, I don't know, Jesus says some hard things in Matthew. And so it's like, it'd be nice to just skip that. I should probably have someone else preach on this Sunday, right? I have a little teaching team. And I'm reading through, and today the theme is lust and divorce. Glad it's a packed house today. Right? And I didn't pick the passage it stumbles across, and yet here it is. We're reading through the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, and verse 27 through 32. And Jesus speaks his view of lust and divorce, right? And I'm laughing. Darren would say it so early. He goes, what do those have to do with each other? We were laughing about that. Like, yeah, Jesus equates them. So let's open a Bible. If you've got one, we provide these. They're on the ends of the rows. You'll see these. And if you need one, grab one, share them. If there's Bibles sitting there, just pass them down so everybody can find one. And if you go to a Bible Gateway on your phone, and you can open up a app, and you can grab Bible on your phone if you want, and that's how you do it. We're going to look at the Gospel of Matthew, and we're going to start there in verse 5. And let me pray before we read. Lord, we are here because we trust you. You are God. And when you spoke absolute truth. And it's hard for us, Lord, to understand because we live in a culture that spins truth a bunch of different directions until we can't reconcile what is real and what is not, what is truth and what is not. So, Lord, would you speak through your word today, and would you set our hearts correct? Would you set our minds solid, that we follow you? We follow what you say, because you lead us in the paths of righteousness for your name's sake. Do this for us this morning, we ask in your holy name, Jesus. Amen. All right, chapter 5. We've already been kind of unpacking this chapter over the last several weeks, and we're getting to verse 27. And Jesus says, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it's more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than that your whole body be cast into hell. Furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. So Jesus is standing with this crowd, and he's delivering the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is his ultimate manifesto of what he's wanting to teach, the sanctity of God, the morals of God, the laws of God, and he's teaching them. And up till now, up till this time, it's been pretty much, if you don't do something, you're a good person. If you don't commit the act, you're all right. And Jesus is taking things to a higher standard. He's like, oh, that's pretty cool for how humans have done it for a long time in obeying God's laws. But he's saying, I'm here to take it a step further. And the step further is what's going on the inside, regardless of action, matters to God. Where your thoughts are, where your heart is, where your emotions go, where your mind goes, that matters to God. He's actually upping the bar of what righteousness looks like. It's not enough just to not do. You have to up the ante and say it's how you even think. And of course, it's supposed to be shocking, and everybody's supposed to look at it and go, wow, what chance do I have then? Right? That's how it's supposed to be, because Jesus is trying to lay down this idea that God's standard of absolute perfection is awfully high, and we don't measure up. And the only way we can measure up is if God does something to change us from the inside. That's the point of the whole Sermon on the Mount. So when he gets to verse 27 and he says, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. And he's laying down the 10 Commandments. He's saying, of course, you've heard, don't commit adultery. It's one of the big 10, right? He says, that's what you've heard. As long as you don't do the act, you're okay. But then he kicks it to a level. He says, but I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And it's an interesting passage, because when he says looks at a woman, it's an interesting way the Greek is phrased, because the way it's phrased is to look at her for the purpose of desire. It's not a glance. It's not a momentary sort of, oh, I just saw this person and immediately I just thought, wow, she's beautiful, or some kind of thing. It's an intentional, deliberate, continued gaze for the purpose of sexual arousal. And it's interesting because in this passage, he puts the responsibility on the guy who's doing the viewing, not on the girl, right? I know some of you grew up and went to church and you went to purity culture and they blamed the girl. The girl had to be blamed for how the guys reacted. This passage is blaming the guy, right? It's saying how you do it. That's how it is. It's interesting. So somewhere in between, the responsibility is on the guy and how he views with his purposeful intent in his heart. Somewhere between that and wearing a single feather for a dress is probably the good middle ground, right? That's probably somewhere in the middle is the right, healthy perspective to have. And it's interesting because the idea of the word for lust even is an interesting. Whoever looks at a woman to lust for her, that word lust is an interesting Greek word because it means an intense longing, a burning passion, or a desire. It's not a momentary impulse. It's a longing and a thoughtful, contemplated lust. It's something that is going after, right? It's not just a moment spark. It's a intense longing. That's what that particular word for lust means. Epithumia is the actual Greek word. Barclay, his commentary, he said, the person condemned is the one who deliberately uses their eyes for the intention of rousing desire to sin. That's an interesting way to phrase that. Let me repeat that. The person condemned is the one who deliberately uses their eyes for the intention of rousing desire to sin. That's an interesting way to phrase it. Now, it's kind of funny. Why are you thinking why is adultery the thing? Why does he jump to that? Because in our culture, we might say, well, she's single, she's not married, so it's good to go. Or I'm single, I'm not married, I'm good to go, right? Just talking about adultery, you got to be married. But culturally, what they were referring to is the whole breakdown of the larger picture of society, because God's intention was that man would marry a woman. So it's even if you're single now, the issue is at some point in your life, at some point in your journey, God's intention was to mate you up with someone. And for the sake of that future someone, he's protecting you. And so the whole idea was this idea that there's, in that cultural time especially, less so in modern America, but definitely then, is whether you're married or single, it doesn't matter, because the adultery thing was coming into play because of the basis that person's ultimate life goal is to be with someone else. Your ultimate life goal might be to someone else. So he's saying this intentional, deliberate use of your eyes for arousing desire to sin is the problem. The InterVarsity Press New Testament commentary said this about this passage. Lust is antithetical to true love. It dehumanizes another person into an object of passion, leading us to act as if the other were a visual or emotional prostitute for our use. Fueled by selfish passion, adultery violates the sanctity of another person's being and relationships. Love, by contrast, seeks what is best for a person, including strengthening their marriage. Adultery usually involves considerable rationalization, justifying one's behavior as necessary or loving, but lust is the mother of adultery, the demonic force that allows human beings to justify exploiting one another sexually, at the same time betraying the most intimate of commitments where trust ought to abide secure, even if it can flourish nowhere else. Lust demands possession. Love values, respects, and seeks to serve the other person with what is genuinely good for them. Lust is always incompatible with acknowledging God as the supreme desire of our hearts because it is contrary to his will. Interesting dialogue on this whole issue of lust and that kind of. I remember once years ago being at a men's retreat, and the guy who was speaking was a military fellow. And in American military culture, adultery is actually a punishable crime that could get you booted out of the military. And so it's still held there. And he was, at the time, and this would have been the early 2000s, he had gone to China. And he had been spent to speak to their military leaders. And the whole issue came up about why do you Americans still use adultery as a crime for your military officers? Because in China, it was commonplace, expected, that every officer had a side girl. It was commonplace. It was celebrated. It was snickered at, right? It was laughed at. And so it was if you didn't have a side girl, something was wrong with you. And so they were asking him this question about, why are you guys so sort of backward thinking in that? And he sat before this room. He said it was a full auditorium of military officers in the Chinese government and the Chinese military structure. And he said, the issue is this. If your commanding officer, or the officer right above you, if he is willing to defy and throw away and destroy his most intimate relationships, that of his wife and children, if he's willing to trash those, what's he willing to do to you? And all the snickering in the room stopped, and he said it went silent. And you said you could have heard a pin drop. Because the truth is, if you're willing to destroy your wife and your children, and you're a military officer with the power of life and death over your subordinates, what are you willing to do to them? I never forgot that. That's an interesting moral compass. It's an interesting place of saying, and we in America, we're so weird because we entertain ourselves on adultery, right? And so we sort of shrug it off now as a society, as a group. We don't think much of it. We don't look at it. But the honest fact is that for a lot of people, it's like, well, you could still be a good man or a decent boss, and everybody knows my boss is committing adultery, but we still think he's a good boss. But the answer is still the same. Oh, really? Because if he's willing to do that to his family, what's he willing to do to you as his employee? That ought to be the way we couch things morally. And we're like, well, I'll tell you what he'll do. He'd throw you under the bus first chance he got. He'd destroy your life first chance he got if it suited his needs, his wants, his desires. See, it's not something to take lightly. Jesus was saying this. He's like, look, I know this. Trust me, I'm God. I made human beings. I know the moral fabric of how the whole society is going to work and how it will fall apart. If you don't do it right, the whole thing falls apart. That's what Jesus was trying to say. He says this next thing, which is really kind of interesting, because he goes on to say in that Matthew passage, he goes on to talk about, if your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. Rabbis of his day often used hyperbole. They used really extreme ways of talking to get people's attention, right? And so scholars would look at this and they'd say, okay, causes you to sin. The interesting word sin there, it's actually the word means the bait in a trap. Or the bait in a trap that you would get caught in. To stumble, to trip, to fall down. A tripwire, that would be the word that would be used. A bait trap. Anything that lures a person to destruction. That's the word used for sin in this particular passage right here in Matthew chapter 5, 28 through 32. And he says this, he's saying, surgically remove from your life the things that lead you towards sin. The traps, the enticements, the places, the practices, anything that's a pitfall, get rid of it. Even if you think it's essential in your life. Even if it requires a major change for you. A change of career, a change of locations, a change of friendship circles, a change of entertainment. Whatever the thing might be that is leading you into this destruction, surgically remove it from your life. Even if you think it's essential. Pluck it out. That's what he was saying. Cut it off. It is worth it to reduce your own life down and to simplify things. It's worth it, he's saying, for the gift of righteousness that he'll give us in exchange. For the gift of freedom he'll give us in exchange. For the power of love that will flourish in exchange. What he'll give in exchange for whatever it is we would reduce down or get rid of in our lives, he's saying, oh, I could bless you with so much more. Interesting thing about stuff like lust is lust doesn't really go away if you try not to think about it, right? So like if you have an item like, I have something on a table, I'm going to try not to think about what's on the table right there, right? Don't think about that. Don't see that glass of water. Don't think about it at all, okay? We're going to work on not thinking about the glass of water on the counter right there. How you doing right now? You doing pretty good not thinking about it, right? No, it doesn't work, right? The only way in our lives that we can have the morality start to flourish in our lives that we want is we have to crowd the table with more things. We have to start putting good things and great things in our life so that eventually the thing we're trying not to think about falls off the table and is gone. So instead of saying, I've got sort of this bare table, and all I'm thinking about is start filling your life with other activities. Start filling your thoughts with other things. Start reading different books. Start having different entertainment. Start picking up a cause to work for. Join some kind of a group that does super noble things in society or around. Figure out what you could do that you're spending your spare time thinking about the new things that are joyful and a blessing to your life instead of trying not to think about the bad things. Trying not to think about the bad things never works. You got to fill your life with new and fresh and wonderful things so that you spend more of your energy focused on what is positive and what is excellent and what is true and what is noble. More of your time spent thinking about that than crowds out the room on the table for this stuff that is destructive. That's typically how it's always worked. Jesus goes on in this passage and he says, furthermore, it's been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. It's interesting why he would talk about lust and immediately then talk about adultery and talk about divorce. Like right on the heels with each other, right? And I've noticed over time, I didn't know this as much when I was young, and over time as I've watched and watched and watched, that oftentimes as marriages are falling apart, and I saw this particularly when I was a bit younger, oftentimes it's because one of the two spouses often believes there's someone better out there for me. There's someone better out there for me. I could get rid of what I have because something better is out there. Now, not always. As time has worn on, I've seen some that just said, you know, I got a divorce because it was destructive to my life, and I'm living out here free and single, and I'm happy, and just I don't want to be bothered. But many I've watched have like, because I believe something better is out there for me. And it's amazing how many times as a pastor, you'll have people sit in your office years later and say, I could have saved my first marriage. I just wasn't willing to try. I could have done it, but I thought something better was out there. And rather than waste any more time on what I had, I thought something fresh would be out there. And so I went out to get the new thing and found out I'm just as bad off now as I was then. I needed to change something inside me before I was ready. Jesus throws this down because it's actually a law in Deuteronomy. He's saying, furthermore, it's been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. That actually comes from Deuteronomy 24. It's an interesting passage. Here it is. Put it on the screen for you. Moses is talking to the people. Deuteronomy was the second law. It's given at the tail end of Moses' life just before they cross into the promised land. He's repeating the laws that were given in Exodus and Leviticus, some of them that were in Numbers, and he gives it to the next generation because the generation that was born in slavery has died out, and now this new generation is going to cross into the promised land, so he gives them the Old Testament a second time. He gives it the law again. And in Deuteronomy 24, he says, when a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanness in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, when she is departed from his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, if the latter husband detests her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband dies who took her as his wife, then her former husband who divorced her must not take her back to be his wife and after she has been defiled, for that is an abomination before the Lord, and you shall not bring sin on the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. When they translate Hebrew and Greek, sometimes you get some super run-on sentences. And of course, what's the focus? By Jesus' day, what were the words that were the most important to all the guys in Jesus' day? She's found no favor in his eyes because of some uncleanness. What does that even mean, right? And the interesting Hebrew word, it's kind of a weird word because it means like nakedness is actually the uncleanness. It means nakedness. But yet other places in the law had already talked about adultery, so it must not be talking about adultery. It must be talking about something else. So what is it? So by Jesus' time, there were these 2 or 3 schools of thought, 2 major schools of thought. One of them was from Rabbi Shammai, and his group of his followers, they taught divorce can only be granted for adultery. That's the only grounds you can get a divorce was for adultery. And keep in mind, in that culture for the Hebrews, they actually could have more than one wife. The other school of thought was the school of Hillel. Hillel had a more broad view of what find no favor in his eyes meant. And find no favor in his eyes meant if she burnt his dinner, you could divorce her. If she talked to a stranger in the marketplace, you could divorce her. If she was a brawler, which meant she got in a fight that the neighbors could hear, you could divorce her. If she spoke disrespectfully to her husband's family, you could divorce her. Successors to Hillel said, if he found a better looking woman, that was good enough grounds to finding no favor in his eyes. Originally, Deuteronomy was restricting the practice of divorce. That was the reason for it. It wasn't creating a command. So now you have the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel. Which one do you think was the most popular? Wild guess, of course. The guy that gave excuses at any time, any way to just dump your marriage and move on. Hillel's was the most popular. So when Jesus is coming on the scene, he's having to break through this culture that was throwing away their marriages like modern America does. In fact, a woman couldn't divorce. She had no power of divorce. Well, that's not entirely true. Women had no right to choose to divorce their husband. There was only a couple of reasons women were granted a legal right to divorce their husband. The first was if they went 10 years without having children, a woman could divorce her husband. That was one. 10 years without having children. The second would be if he became a leper. She could divorce him if he became a leper. The third was if he took up a disgusting trade like being a tanner, tanning animal skins because he had to be with dead bodies all day. She could divorce him. That's it. Women, you didn't have any rights at all in the old Hebrew culture. That was it. Those are the only three reasons a woman could get a divorce. But a guy could get a divorce if he found a better looking woman or if you burned his dinner or he just didn't like you anymore. He could toss you, kick you to the curb. It's interesting because the Greeks in that same culture, that was the Hebrew way, the Greeks' view of marriage was really weird. And it's hard to tie down the Greeks because they weren't a single nation, they were city-states. So what was practiced in Corinth, what was practiced in Athens, and what would have been practiced in Thessalonica wasn't necessarily what was practiced in Sparta. So you try to figure out, what are the rules? But by and large, for the Greeks, wives were actually, their only purpose was to keep the home and procreate and raise on the family name, have children. Wives didn't go out. They were kept inside the house. They rarely were seen in public. It was not something that you would do. You didn't even dine with the men. If your husband had men friends over to the house, the wife would serve the meal and exit. She wouldn't even be allowed to sit in the room and have dinner with them. For the Greeks, they were expected, every guy was expected to have a girl on the side. That was the way it is. You didn't marry for love. You married to secure property rights and to keep your family line going. That's all a wife was for. That's how the Greeks did it. The Romans' view of marriage actually originally was really strong. Records show that for the first couple hundred years of the Roman Republic, there actually wasn't any divorcing. Romans had a really tight, strong view of marriage for a long time, and then they started taking over the world, and one of the biggest parts of the world they took over was the Greek culture. And the Greek culture got absorbed by the Romans, and guess what happened? The Romans adopted the Greek way of doing things, right? And so eventually, the whole idea of marriage was only for property rights and to secure an inheritance. So you had to know who's going to inherit the estate had to have come from the legal wife and this child born from the legal wife. That was basically her own purpose was to secure property rights and money and passing on the estate to the child. So you had to know which child was legitimate, which one came first, that kind of thing. Who's the real wife here? But Romans, by and large, by Jesus' time, all had girlfriends. They had adopted the Greek ways. Wives were property, and they were contracts that were signed to secure the rights of the estate, not for love. You didn't marry for love at all, right? You had a girl on the side for love. That was what was expected. And that much was like it passed through time. Medieval England and France would be the same. Shoot, you could look at American culture during the Gilded Age. It was the same. Wives were property rights and to bear legitimate children for inheritance purposes. So when Jesus comes along this thing, he's like, oh no, I'm telling you, From the beginning, God said marriage is there's a sanctity to it. And once it's bound, and he wants you to work it out and get it going in further details. Very interesting how Jesus was up in the bar and up in the ante and making it so that marriage could not be thrown away. It was not disposable. Except for the cause of adultery, it was not disposable. In fact, if you looked up the New Testament and you saw all the words where the word divorce occurs in the New Testament, there's only a handful of passages. I think I got them on the screen for you. One of them is Matthew 19. I think I got them on the screen. And you got Josh running lights. He's running sound. He's doing everything. He's running. Okay. So Matthew 19. There's Matthew 5, the chapter we're looking in right now. And in Matthew 19, it's the exact same teaching as Matthew chapter 5. But this time Jesus is preaching in the region called the Decapolis. It's on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and there's more Greeks in that area. And he says a couple of nuanced things that are different because the Greeks had more freedom for the women to divorce than the Hebrews did. But otherwise, same teaching. Mark chapter 10, the same thing again. He teaches the same teaching. He repeats it. Jesus traveled all over, and he repeated his teaching where he went. Luke chapter 16, a repeat of the same teaching. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those passages are all this teaching being repeated in different zones. The next place you see divorce occur, the Apostle Paul addresses it in 1 Corinthians in chapter 7, verse 15, and then 27 and 28. And in that case, he's talking about what it means to be married to someone who's not a believer in Jesus. And if they abandon you and leave, let them go. Right? Otherwise, stay in the marriage because you don't know if for the sake of the children, there's a spiritual blessing in the home because the one believer is enough to make this home spiritually blessed. So, InterVarsity Press Commentary says this. Paul's and Matthew's exceptions to divorce constitute 2/3 of the New Testament references to this topic. And both point to the same kind of exception. The person whose marriage is ended against his or her will. As Craig Blomberg, the professor emeritus of the New Testament at Denver Seminary, reasons, other exceptions probably exist, but they must be governed by the principles that unite the two biblical exceptions. 1, both infidelity and abandonment destroy one of the basic components of marriage. 2, both leave one party without any other options if attempts at reconciliation are spurned. And 3, both use divorce as a last resort. That some will abuse this freedom cannot make us insensitive to the innocent party who genuinely needs that freedom. In other words, Jesus' exceptions do not constitute an excuse to escape a difficult marriage. They exonerate those who genuinely wished to save their marriage but were unable to do so because the spouse's unrepentant adultery, abandonment, or abuse de facto destroyed the marriage bonds. So this means that most New Testament scholars would say, what are the grounds, biblical grounds, to be able to get a divorce as a Christian person? The biblical grounds always fall into adultery, abandonment, and violence. Those are the only 3 grounds. Adultery, abandonment, violence. Those are the 3 grounds that permit divorce. Our culture says, any reason at all, no-fault divorce. We can do no-fault divorce. And of course, that was big in the 70s when they started implementing the no-fault divorce laws and saying, let's just make it easier for people to get out of bad situations and bad marriages. And it's actually better for the family that both partners are happy. And if it takes getting out of the marriage for one to be happy, let's allow for that. So we created no-fault divorce. And it took about 30 years to watch the generations underneath that grow up from divorced homes. And guess what the stats are now for children of divorced homes? Mental illness, suicide, higher prison rates, higher crime rates, higher dysfunction, more likely to be married multiple times themselves, right? The stats all came in. The children of divorce actually didn't end up with a better life like they said they were going to get, because now it's bad for the kids if you stay in a bad marriage. It ended up being, no, actually the stats are in, and it destroyed the American fabric of society. The family got destroyed, and we're having a hard time figuring out how to rebuild it. We're having a hard time trying to figure out how to get back to a strong structural society that God initially intended, because we want to have the strong society, we just don't want to do it by God's ways. And God's like, I put it in the fabric of the universe. So here we are today. Weird thing about life is you can't go back in time, right? Life only marches forward. And every single one of us would say, if I could go back, if time marched backwards too, there's definitely some things I'd go back and redo. I'd do differently if I could. But here we are today. One of the slogans that we have here in the Gathering House is, your starting point gets to be your starting point. Which means you hit a wall and someday you're like, oh, this is now my starting point. The status I'm in today. Maybe you're divorced. Maybe you look at your life and you say, yeah, I could have saved it if I would have tried harder. Or maybe you look back and any other decision you made, you said, I could have done something different. But here you are today asking, what happens now? What do I do now? And I would say the now is coupled in 1 John 1, 8, and 9. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves. The truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. If we sit down with Jesus and say, yeah, I screwed things up, Lord. I wish I didn't. If I go back, now that I feel the pain, now that I feel the sorrow, now that I see the fallout, I wish I could go back in time and do it different, but I can't. And Jesus is saying, if you just can say that and confess it, he will cleanse you from all unrighteousness. Your starting point will be like, okay, let's clean you up, and you get to start from here. And you start from here moving forward, saying from here forward, I want to do it God's way. There's still that famous passage in Psalm 23. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Right? We still serve a God who restores souls, who undoes the damage, who fixes what was broken, who sets us on the right path again, who can renew and bring back into our lives the blessings he always wanted to give us, even if we can't go and undo the past. Even if we can't untangle the past and set our feet back on that path again, maybe that one was broken and it's forever gone, but we're moving forward from here. And he says, okay, your starting point gets to be your starting point. I can renew you, make you clean, and restore your soul from this point forward. He would just say, from this point forward, let's do it my way. That's what he would say. Some of us in the room, golly, do we ever live in a culture where lust is so easily thrown in our face, right? Easily. We are more exposed to pornography and easy access to it than at any other time in history. And it's interesting, reading articles, it's like, it's ubiquitous across the globe. We don't share common languages, but we share the common statistics for pornography. Whether you're in China, or whether you're in France, or whether you're in England, or whether you're in the United States, or whether you're in Russia. We share the common stats. And the current stat is about 85% of men in the United States are seeing pornography about once a week. You think the church is an exception? Probably not. Right, let's just be honest. So here we are, saying, wow, it's everywhere. Even if you want to avoid it, I don't even care about the Oscars. I'm just trying to see what's going on in Ukraine, and they're throwing it in my face, right? So what do we do? Well, for one, we just recognize God's standard of purity that he wants for us. So we're going after, what should we do? Well, recognize it's not going to help our marriage, or it's not going to help our future spouse to go down those roads. It is not going to help. It's going to make things worse for us. There's books, there's websites you could go to, which you get some learning on and develop some of those things. The psychological culture out there is still trying to figure out, is pornography good or bad? They can't even figure it out at this particular point, because they don't know, like, does pornography, is the pornography that's on the internet violent to women? And they're now saying, evidently, yes, it is. But they can't decide whether people who would normally be violent to women anyway are the ones looking at porn, or does looking at porn make you violent to women? They can't decide that. They're like, the psychological world's like, more studies need to be done. Like, and that's one of the problems is who's going to honestly join that study, right? So they know. They're like, our biggest problem is you can't get truth when you try to do a study. So we don't know. We don't really know. God knows. God knows. God's standards are something different. So he would say, delete apps. Block websites. You know, there's actually some software you could install on your computer, which you could find a buddy, and you and the buddy could share the software, which means every website you look at automatically goes to your buddy's computer. And every website your buddy looks at automatically goes to your computer. And it's a great way to hold each other accountable, because you can't search anything that your buddy's not going to see, and he can't search anything you're not going to see. There's software out there you can do that. You know, maybe for some of you, you need to say, I need to take my computer and I need to move it out of a back office or a downstairs basement office. It needs to be in the main room where everybody can see, and that's just going to keep me safer. Maybe that's what you need to do. Maybe you need to look and say, okay, I need to start looking at some of the things. Maybe I need to delete Showtime and HBO and get rid of my Netflix. And you're like, oh my God, that's like asking me to cut off my hand or plug out my eye. Why, yes. Yes, it is, right? But maybe he's saying it's time to do something bigger than trying to use your willpower, because your willpower isn't working. Your willpower isn't working. And Jesus would say, for the sake of your own happiness and joy, he would say to us, begin to take bigger steps of getting honest, finding someone to talk to, working through this stuff, making changes that are bigger to protect yourself so that God could give the blessing he wants to give, so that God could do new and fresh things in our hearts. I would say, you know, given all these things that we're all sitting in the room, and I would guarantee there's not a single person sitting in this room whose life has not been touched in some capacity by American divorce. You either are divorced and you're on another marriage, you've the product of divorce, you've got divorce in your family. There isn't a single person in the room who's not touched by it and hasn't felt the hurt and the pain, the frustration of it, the awkwardness of it. We were all touched by it. We're all saying, okay, I need to start fresh. Right here is where I am. My starting point gets to be my starting point. I have to allow God to begin working in my life now in fresh and new ways. And he will. He will. I think for every single one of us in the room, even if we're not even trying, American culture loves to throw lust at us. It just loves it. Sex sells, right? And so it doesn't matter what you try to do, you're going to be having lust thrown at you. So there has to be ways in which you figure out, how do I manage myself in this lust-filled culture I live in? How do I manage myself? And it's going to take conversations. It's going to take a little extra time. It's going to take maybe some personal restrictions of losing some things you don't want to lose. But you need to lose them for the sake of your own maturing in Christ. And for each of you, you're going to have to figure out what that is. I thought we would close today by doing a universal benediction that we would stand and recite together, because it's the right benediction for all of us in the room. And it's found in Psalm 139, right? It's a great benediction because it's a super prayer for all of us. Because the opening line is like, search me, God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties. What gives me fear and anxiety and tension, right? And a little bit I was able to do, which I couldn't even weave into the sermon today, the whole issue of lust that they were discussing and the stuff I was reading on the internet, and I wanted to weave in, but it would have made the sermon another 40 minutes long, is the problem actually isn't sex. It's something else. It's a wounded soul and spirit. It's loneliness. It's isolation. It's damage. It's insecurity. That's the real problem. Sex is just being used as the numbing agent to cover the pain. And so find out what that pain is, right? Try me and know my fears, my anxieties. See if there's any wicked way in me. Another translation is, see if there's any harmful way. See if there's anything in me that hurts me. That's a great way to say it. So, is there? I can guarantee for every one of us in the room, the answer is, yep. Yep. I wonder what it is. I wonder what it is for me, like you might be wondering what it is for you. And lead me in the way everlasting. Take my hand, Jesus, and lead me to better ground than the one I'm on now. All right, so this is going to be our benediction. Stand and we're going to recite this together. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties. And see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Amen. God bless you. I know you've got a lot. For some of you, you've got some work to do. And it means you need a buddy to talk to. You need a partner, you need a girlfriend you can talk to. Do that. Begin that this week. That would be my encouragement. God bless you.